I want to start by dedicating this to all the kidney warriors who have come and gone before me, and to all the living and deceased donors who have made life for so many people possible. My name is Dave White. Everyone calls me Dave. My name is David Matthew White. My mom used to call me Mother's Lamb, but that was a long time ago. I'm a person living with kidney disease. I currently have a kidney transplant from a deceased donor, and I am over 3 years post-transplant. My story begins in October of 2009, actually October 16th, 2009. It was a Saturday, and my wife Hilva insisted that I go to the hospital, to the emergency room to get checked out because she knew that something was really wrong with me. Or I was still kind of in denial, like some guys do. It's just a cold, it'll pass, etc. But she said, look, you have to go to the hospital to get checked out now. So we went to George Washington University Hospital in downtown Washington, D.C., to the emergency room. It has a wheelchair ramp, the emergency room, and it has 2 flights of stairs. I was able to make it up the first flight under my own power, but I couldn't make it up the second flight of stairs. They had to bring a wheelchair around to bring me into the emergency room. So they checked me in, and they took some blood. After they could finally draw some blood, they had to actually bring in a professional to stick me and get some blood out. And they found out pretty quickly that there was something really wrong with me. I went right to intensive care, and I stayed a couple of days there, and they confirmed that my kidneys had failed. They had completely gone, and it was a complete shock to me. I had no idea. I literally didn't know anything about my kidneys until they stopped working. I spent about 3 weeks in the hospital. When I was in the hospital, they placed a catheter in my chest so I could begin dialysis immediately. Dialysis is the process where your blood gets cleaned, and for people like me whose kidneys no longer can remove water, water is removed as well. So I started dialyzing in the hospital, and I had 3 weeks to think about my new life. It just really never registered. But at the same time, I knew that I would get through it somehow, and I'd come through it and be better than ever. I had no idea what that would entail and how much drama and tears and stress and what a challenge it would be. When I finally did leave the hospital, 3 weeks after checking in, I had a terrible attitude. I still didn't get it at all. I didn't understand that I needed a machine to keep me alive. So that's how I started dialysis. That's how I went into my clinic the first day. That first day was surreal. When I walked into that dialysis clinic floor for the first time, I always say that it was a cross between a sci-fi movie and an operating room. There were 24 people sitting around in chairs with needles and tubes sticking out of their arms, and you could see blood going in and out of these machines. I'd seen one in the hospital, but I'd never seen 24 of them at the same time. It was totally creepy. They brought me over to my chair and sat me down. My catheter was still oozing blood. They actually had to replace it in the hospital, readjust it a couple of times, but it was still bleeding more than it should. So the charge nurse, I won't mention her name, but it was a white lady in blue scrub. She came over and looked at me and frowned and snarled and said, "We can't let him in here like this." And I pushed back so hard. I said, "Look, I took the trouble of getting here. I'm not going anywhere. You're going to dialyze me here today." So that's how my first dialysis session started. I got home. I don't know how I got home, and my big brother Owen, actually came down to Washington from New York to help me get through that first week. Now, my first session was okay. I got home with no problem. But that second session, I'm really fortunate that he was with me there, because there's this thing about when you start dialysis, I don't know the official name, I don't remember it, but it's some kind of disequilibrium where after dialysis, it's more than just low blood pressure. It's like I couldn't even think. And I was just so fortunate that my brother was there to help me in the cab ride home, because I wouldn't have made it without his help. I had a lot of help the first year, and especially the first 6 months. The first 6 months, I fought with the clinic. I thought that I knew more about my body than they did. And like I said, I didn't believe that I needed a machine to keep me alive. So I skipped a lot of dialysis sessions. I'd make up excuses. Finances was a problem for me back then, because my wife and I used to be the main breadwinner in the house. I was an IT manager for an international law firm, making 6 figures. But when I started dialysis, all that money had gone. I had no health insurance, and I had no savings. And my wife had gone from providing the secondary income to being the main breadwinner. So we were in serious financial straits when what we call crashed into dialysis. And she had to go to work every day, and she couldn't take me to the clinic. I had to get back and forth there myself, and I was still too weak to take mass transit. So I would have to take a cab ride, and those cab rides were pretty expensive. It was kind of easy for me to use that for a reason to not go some days, and I would do that. There were weeks when I missed more sessions than I made. You're supposed to go 3 times a week. Sometimes I'd go twice a week. Sometimes I'd only go once a week. And I thought it was okay. One of the reasons I thought it was okay is because I didn't die. So I said, I missed the dialysis session, I felt like crap before, I felt like crap after, I feel like crap all the time, so what difference does it make? That was my reasoning. And part of this crazy reasoning is because my blood wasn't getting cleaned at all. So I had all this toxic blood going through my brain. So I thought I was thinking logically, and obviously I was not. Part of the conditions of care, is what it's called, is everyone's supposed to have a care plan meeting after their first 90 days of dialysis, just to make sure everything's going okay, and they develop what's called a plan of care. And it should be personalized to you. Now, I didn't have my first care plan meeting for 6 months because it was so hard to track me down and pin me down. But they finally got around to doing it. So my first care plan meeting was April 10th, 2010. It was in one of the rear administrative offices in the clinic with myself and my wife, who fortunately lived within walking distance of the clinic. She had to take time off from work to be there. She wasn't happy about that, but, she was my rock, and she was there for me. So it was the 2 of us, and actually 2 social workers, a dietitian, the charge nurse. Basically, it was me and 6 women in the room, all sitting down, and they were all taking turns reading me the riot act, telling me what I was doing wrong and the things that I could do better. And I have a harder head than most, and it took a while for it all to sink in. And at one point, I sat there, I'm thinking, wow, these women are just sitting here giving me the business, and I have no defense. So at one point, I got up and excused myself. I said I had to go to the bathroom, which was I wasn't making urine at the time, so I just had to make up an excuse. But that's what I did. So I just went out and collected myself and came back in. And we summed up the meeting after that. And so I was given us things to do to get my situation better. And the closing words were, and I remember it like they said it, like you would say it to me right now, because these are the words that I needed to hear. They said that I wouldn't be around very long if I didn't start going to dialysis, and didn't sink in at once. But I went home and I got settled, and I went into the bathroom and I literally looked at myself in the mirror and I said, Dave, they're right, you can do better. And right then and there, I decided to go to dialysis 3 times a week, no matter what. And sure enough, after a couple of months, I actually started to feel better. And wow, maybe these people really know what they're talking about. I had to realize that I don't know as much as I think I do, and that people know more than I do, and I have to listen. That was really the aha moment in my with my health, to start listening to people. And the minute I did that, things started getting better. About the fall of 2010, and I'm starting to feel like I have a future again. I decided to make a couple of lifestyle changes, and I would time them as New Year's resolutions. I'm one of those people who, I make 7 or 8 resolutions, and I'm lucky if I keep one. So, but that year, probably that year, I probably made 6 or 7 and only kept 2 or 3, but I made and kept 2 very important resolutions. And the first one was to stop smoking. I'd started smoking cigarettes in junior year of high school. New Year's Eve 2010 is the last time I smoked a cigarette, and I haven't smoked one since then. The one thing that kept me from smoking, other than, knowing, that addiction doesn't care. It wants what it wants. But what got me over that was saying, just wait 1 more minute. I don't know how many times I just waited 1 more minute, but it took weeks and months, but eventually I just didn't have to wait 1 more minute anymore. Resolution number 2 was to start exercising again. I've been I was running around like a kid, just like everyone else. I played high school basketball. I was in the Army for 2 years in the early 80s, so we did push-ups before breakfast. So I figured I wouldn't have that much trouble exercising again. I didn't know how much strength that I had lost until I tried to do a push-up on New Year's Day 2011. And I found out I couldn't do a single push-up. And it was an out-of-body experience where I was looking at myself trying to push my face up off the floor. So I thought about it and I said, okay, from now on, every morning, I'm going to ask myself 2 questions. Question number 1, do you have time to exercise? And question number 2, are you physically able to exercise? Every day where I can answer those 2 questions, yes, I got in a workout, no questions asked, no matter what. And it was literally a year and a half before I took a day off. Fortunately, there was a gym in our apartment complex that had just opened up right around the time of the new year. It was there for me just in the nick of time. So when it's time to exercise, I go down there and mess around with weights and the treadmill, do the few push-ups that I could, or I'd go outside and run. It wasn't really running at that time. It was I would do a run walk or a really slow jog. So that's how I would exercise. And like I said, it was a year and a half before I took a day off. So that year, 2011, I wound up doing over 15,000 push-ups. And obviously, I count every single one of them, and I still count them to this day. Last year, I went over the 100,000 push-up mark. And I set a new goal for myself. It took me almost 7 years to do 100,000 push-ups. And I decided I'm going to try the next 100,000 in 4 years. And so far, I'm on track. Last year, I did over 28,000 push-ups. So things are going well. This has actually changed my attitude. People were telling me at the clinic that people actually realized that I was a nice guy. I remember when the receptionist said, I guess she said this because one day I actually asked her what her name was. One day I decided, I'm going to actually make friends with people and find out, people's names. So one day she said, David, your attitude has changed. And once people started complimenting me, and that's like what's the saying is, encouragement is oxygen for the soul. Once people were remarking about the change that they saw in me, that motivated me to do more. Going back to dialysis and being more positive and looking for ways to just get healthier. One day in the waiting room in the dialysis clinic, there was a reading table with various magazines. So I went over to the table, and one of the things that was there to read was a pamphlet. And it was a little trifold, and it was about a Mid-Atlantic Renal Coalition. So I said, what is that? I'm not even sure I knew what renal meant at the time, but I opened it up, and it was a trifold for a patient advisory committee. And it wasn't so much the patient advisory committee that got my attention, but it was the organization that had formed it, which is the Mid-Atlantic Renal Coalition. I found out what they did, and that they sort of watched over the dialysis clinics to make sure that they were doing the right things for their patients. And the light bulb went off over my head, and I said, okay, I need to get on this patient advisory committee and let everyone know that I'm on this patient advisory committee so I can get the best care. So and that was it. I guess I had no interest in advocating for anyone but myself. I didn't even know what the word advocate meant, literally, at that point. That's how I got my start as an advocate with the Patient Advisory Committee. And I got to meet so many great people, like my friends Andrew Williams and J.C. Smith, who are no longer with us, and others who are on that Patient Advisory Committee, and started hearing their stories and hearing, exchanging pointers. And that's how I realized the importance of being an advocate. And it gave me something else to hang on to kind of show that I can do something other than just sit in a chair. Something to put on my calendar, something to keep my mind engaged other than sitting there and watching TV and maybe reading magazines. And that's how I met a gentleman named Richard Knight, who at the time was the vice president of the American Association of Kidney Patients. He's now the president. He kind of noticed me and said he invited me to go to Capitol Hill to advocate, and kind of noticed that I was really kind of good at advocating, and he just kind of opened that door up to me. I just didn't know the extent of kidney disease. It was a real learning experience, and I made the most of it. I've always been an avid learner. I was on dialysis for a total of 6 years, 3 different modalities. Yeah, it's been a while, so I kind of have to remember. My first 2 years were regular in-center hemodialysis, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And for those 2 years, I wanted no part of a transplant. Because first of all, for the first year, I simply wasn't in the right mindset even to be a dialysis patient. So I had to get over that. But once I got my mind right and I started looking around at options, when I heard about transplant, all I heard about were negative things, like the cost of immunosuppressants, failed transplants, people dying after transplant. I never heard anything good about it because I never saw anybody who had a transplant. All you see in the clinics, more often than not, are people with failed transplants, and you hear horror stories. So I wanted no part of it. Fortunately, I had a social worker who always said, keep your options open. And that's what I did. It didn't take long before I got tired of sitting in that chair for 6 hours at a time. And I said, there's got to be a better way. So a couple of months after trying nocturnal hemodialysis, I said, okay, I'm ready to consider other options. So that's when I explored transplant and peritoneal dialysis. So I kind of did both at the same time. I started my transplant evaluation process at Georgetown University Hospital in 2011, and I got on their list January of 2012. I had heard that by then I was advocating, and I heard that you can get listed in more than one transplant region, and Johns Hopkins was only about an hour away in Baltimore, so I said that it might be a good idea to get listed there. So that's what I did in 2013. I got listed there in July. I believe in 2014, George Washington opened up a transplant clinic, and it just happened to be in the same building as my dialysis clinic. So once I had my mind set to try transplant, and I heard that we had our own transplant clinic upstairs, it was a no-brainer to go up there and get evaluated one day. So I started the process in 2015. My evaluation was March 24th, and I went up there, and Dr. Melanson, who was our transplant surgeon, he took one look at me and said, "Look, we're going to get you a transplant." And the minute I heard that, I said, "Okay, let's go." I started that evaluation process in March. It was March 24th, actually. And I finally got on the list on June 26th, 2015. The last part of getting on the list was getting my teeth taken care of. I had a lot of dental issues. One thing about renal failure, the kidneys regulate your minerals, and I had a serious mineral imbalance in my body. I had way too much phosphorus, and my body was compensating by pulling calcium out of my bones. To this day, if I exercise a lot, I'll walk around with a limp because I had some calcium pulled out of one of my legs. And I also lost a lot of teeth because of the calcium loss. So I had to get a lot of dental work done before I was listed for a transplant. This is another one of the strokes of luck that I had. I couldn't afford dental work. And Medicare doesn't pay for dental work. But in 2013, I believe it was, one day I was watching television, and I heard that Catholic Charities was having one of their quarterly free dental clinics one weekend, and it was a Friday and a Saturday, and I heard about it one Friday evening that they were having the free dental clinic in Maryland, and the next day was the last day. It was in Columbia, Maryland, and I live in Prince George's County, literally across the street from DC. The moment I heard that, my mind sprang into action. I said, "You have to go get this dental work done." So I had to jump through about 7 hoops to go get a rental car. And I had to rent it, even though I only needed it for a few hours. I had to rent it for the entire weekend. So I had to drive Saturday morning about an hour to Columbia and wait in line with hundreds of other people. But that next morning, I got all the dental work I needed done. And so going back to my transplant, I had to get final dental clearance as part of my transplant evaluation. The week before I got listed, I had that work done, but I hadn't had the paperwork done yet. I got listed June 26, 2015. June 27th was a Saturday morning, and by then I was on dialysis Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, first shift. So that Saturday morning, June 27th, I went to dialysis like I normally did. And on the way home, I stopped at the supermarket. I got 2 big grocery bags full of groceries because I'm a big, strong guy now. I got back on Metro. I schlepped the bags home. I put everything away. I popped a big bag of popcorn. And I took a handful of popcorn and I started eating it. And I'm watching television and I look at my phone and I have 3 messages. I'm like, I have 3 messages from this lady at the transplant clinic. I'm like, we had a discussion a couple of days before about, okay, you're on the list. I got the call on the 26th to say that I was on the list. He said, okay, you're on the list now, but I really need that paperwork from the dentist. I said, okay, I have it, and I'll bring it in, as soon as I can. So the next day, after dialysis, I have these 3 voicemails, and I see it's from the transplant coordinator. I'm like, come on, it's just paperwork. Why are you bugging me like this? So I listen to the first message, and she says, we have a kidney for you. My mind went blank, but my body knew what to do. I put everything down. I told Hilva, I said, they said I have a kidney. And I said, don't worry about it. I got it. I have to go back downtown and get my blood work done, and on the way downtown, I just went down there, and the coordinator was waiting for me. We got the blood work done. One thing I remember was that there was a gentleman from the clinic there who was also getting his blood work done. So that meant that there was more than one person getting tested for this kidney. So, when I was coming out from getting my work done, I saw him there, and I just said, are you here for the kidney? And, I shook his hand and said, good luck, and went about my way, and I went back home. And while I was eating later that day, the coordinator said, you're a match. Be here tomorrow morning. So it went pretty quickly from you're on the list to we have a kidney for you to being in the hospital the very next morning to get the kidney. I had to wait all day long to get the kidney, but I'm like, I've been through all this. I'll wait here all week if I have to. It's not a problem. I got transplanted, and I woke up the next morning, and they said everything went well. Unfortunately, my kidney didn't wake up for almost 2 weeks. I said, well, what can I do? I can just sit here and wait day after day. The doctors are saying everything's fine. It'll wake up. But at the same time, to prime the pump, they are pumping me full of all sorts of fluids and trying not to dialyze me. They want the kidney to start on its own. But so day after day, they're filling me up with fluids, and I'm still not making any urine yet. And my blood pressure is going higher and higher because I've just got so much water on me. And I cried more than a few times in there. My wife stayed with me as long as she could, but she actually had some family issues that she really had to tend to back in New York. So at one point, she had to go back to New York, and I said, look, go take care of it. I got this, I totally owned it at that point. So I had plenty of time to think about what I'd been through to get there. And I said, look, if Hercules, which I called him, I'd picked that name out because I knew that he and I would have many labors to perform together. And I said, look, if Hercules doesn't wake up, I did the best I could. And I'll just go back to dialysis. And when that call comes again, I won't hesitate. Eventually, Hercules started to wake up, not all at once. And, they put it's called the Foley catheter that they put down your penis into your urethra. And the fluid, the urine's supposed to come out through that. But my catheter had broken. So instead of the urine coming out through it, it was sort of coming out around it. So they couldn't measure my urine. There was no urine output that they could put in a cup and measure, but I could smell urine. And it was the best smell that I'd ever smelled in a long time. I said, hey, I smell like pee and this is awesome, Slowly but surely, it started to wake up, and what a relief it was. So I left the hospital about 40 pounds heavier and very weak and all by myself. I got home, I sat down, I put that bag of, I think at the time I had 17 different medications, and I said, oh my God, how am I going to do this? but I made it through it somehow. By the time I was ready to go back to work, I had been out of work for a good 6 or 7 years, because I'd actually, I have to call it retired. I didn't plan on retiring at the time. I just wanted a break in 2005. So I kind of walked away from the job because I was financially able to do so. And when I thought it was a good time to come back, i.e. my funds are running low, I discovered that we were in a recession and no one was hiring. I no longer had the skills to do what I was currently doing. I was at the point where I was writing out job descriptions for the entire department, including my own description. And when I was writing it in 2004, I realized I wasn't qualified for the job I was doing. So there was no way I was qualified for it 7 years later. That didn't stop me from trying. I did use the state of Maryland's vocational rehabilitation services to try to find employment. And they did a good job of lining me up with work opportunities. But the jobs that they offered, I just knew I wouldn't be happy doing it. So I just kept saying no and kept saying no. And all this time I'm advocating and getting better and better at it and getting recognized regionally and nationally. Part of the reason I became such a good advocate is the internet. I had Wi-Fi, I had a laptop, and I just researched things and organizations and got on mailing lists and availed myself of those opportunities. I did the same thing with self-improvement. One of the things I decided to do was to try to create a business where I could do what I'm doing right now as a career. And so I asked my wife, I said, look, the IT thing, the search isn't working very well, but the advocacy is. And I asked her if I could pursue that, as a career. And she said yes. And I kind of said, okay, let's do this. And the moment that I made that decision, it's like an entire world opened up to me. And right now I sit on the boards of directors of 4 organizations. I chair 2 nationally recognized and respected patient groups. I serve for more organizations than I can count. I can't even fit them on my resume. I just have to put the top 10. And it's really almost come full circle, I give back. I'm sitting here today because of Andrew and JC. I give back as they have taught me to. But there's one more step that I have to take, and that's to return to the workforce. Advocacy is great, and one day it may be a paying job, but it isn't right now. It's a nice income stream, but right now most of my income is still disability. And my wife deserves a lot more than that. So that is my goal at the moment, is to go back to work and maintain this advocacy and the little bit of consulting that I'm doing as a result of that, because I'm confident that in a few years I will be able to do that 100% and have that as, if not a primary source of income, then very close to it.